Well, Cody Leach reviewing a Barbie movie. It's gonna get weird. What is up, guys, and welcome to my review. I don't know how highly anticipated it is of Barbie. Yes, this is the weekend. Barbenheimer. You got Greta Gerwig's Barbie and you got Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer duking it out. This has been like a social media, film, Twitter frenzy for like the past year. People making and buying t-shirts, gonna go out and double feature them. Look, I really have had no idea what to expect from this film. I never grew up playing Barbies. I don't think that's a shock or a surprise. I do have two young daughters, but I don't even think they ever really had Barbies. They've always had more stuffed animals and dogs and things of that nature. So not really much of a Barbie presence, I guess, in my life as a kid or as a father. And from the beginning, as soon as film Twitter took off on this thing, I never knew what the hell this exactly was going to be. It was very clearly not geared towards young children. It was live action. You got Margot Robbie. You got Ryan Gosling in here. The first teaser of it, making fun of 2000: A Space Odyssey. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Almost had to turn in my film card. And even the further trailers and the early reactions and reviews just were using a lot of verbiage that seemed very confusing to me for what I would expect from a Barbie film. So I took out all three of my kids today, my 15-year-old son, my 12-year-old daughter, and my almost 7-year-old daughter to go and check this thing out. And we got a collection of opinions whenever we walked out. To basically run it down, my 15-year-old son enjoyed it. I think he liked a lot of the humor there, and he's at that age where he's starting to, be part of conversations that are a little bit more adult. And so the fact that this movie is a little bit more of an adult conversation, I think that he just enjoys being a part of that. My 12-year-old daughter gave a very unenthusiastic, yeah, I liked it, whenever I asked her. And then my almost 7-year-old daughter said that she loved it, and I think it was just because of all the colors and the style, because there's absolutely no single conversation in this movie that she understood. I could promise you that. But as far as my opinion, starting off with the positives, I did think that it was very impressive how Greta Gerwig was able to create this Barbie world and kind of play on some of the tropes of Barbies and some of the more toy-like in-jokes of Barbies. You have the different dream houses, you have the different styles and the different occupations of various Barbies there, and even just the way that the world itself is part practical and part like cartoonish and hand-drawn in the background. It just had a really neat style to it. And I always appreciate when a filmmaker brings a very distinct style to whatever they're doing. And for something like this, you could have very easily have done the most surface value generic version of this, where Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling are running around in pink clothes in the real world, and that's just who they are. And like something like the Smurfs, where you got cartoon characters and humans kind of mingling with each other. You could have done something really generic like that, but this is anything but. This is like the extreme opposite of what that is. I also think the movie is very smartly written. It's very clever. It's very witty. It has a lot of things to say, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. I mean, there is so much in this film that is satirical and meta and even breaking the fourth wall to a certain degree that it's impressive whenever you can have a tone like that stays consistent throughout the movie. And it's trying to kind of poke fun at Barbie culture and toy culture. It's poking fun at gender roles in America. It's poking fun at some of the differences between men and women. It's poking fun at consumerism and kind of the negative backlash that Barbie has gotten in recent years, and kind of all of that at once. And that's certainly not the direction that I would expect a Barbie movie to go when it was greenlit. But being that I'm an adult and I can grasp a lot of the concepts that they're talking about, it's a little easier to get through a movie like that is speaking on my level than it would be to go and watch a film that is just very low-hanging fruit.
You can go back to your regular life, or you can know the truth about the universe. The choice is now yours.
The first one, the high heel.
You have to want to know, okay? Do it again.
Performance-wise, Margot Robbie is absolutely perfect as Barbie. There's even like in-jokes in the movie about how perfect she is, and I think Ryan Gosling is kind of the star of the show here as far as a lot of the best humorous moments. You know, his version of Ken and Ken in general in this movie is kind of the blunt of a joke, and I think that his comedic timing worked really well in conveying that. I mean, we all knew, regardless what this movie was going to end up with, that casting of those two characters specifically was going to be great. And all the side characters, some recognizable people, like we got Shang-Chi in here playing another version of Ken. You got Will Ferrell in like the leader of Mattel, the CEO. The really good casting and good comedic performances here. Another positive, I did like the soundtrack. When you throw Matchbox 20 in there, you got me. I should have worn my Matchbox 20 shirt that I wore in my horror review yesterday for this review. Well, I don't know who this fucking movie is for, so I took all 3 of my kids. And the final positive is that because there is so many different styles at work here with the Barbie world and the real world and the comedic timing and some of the different subjects they're going over, there's even a couple of like musical numbers in here, I felt like the movie moved at a pretty good little clip. When I found out that this was just a few minutes short of 2 hours, I kind of groaned. I was like, oh God, is this gonna be one of those movies where it's a 90-minute concept that they just don't know how to stop? And I didn't quite feel that way. You know, maybe you could have shaved 5-10 minutes tops off of it and it would have been a little bit better for me. But the movie did a pretty good job at not overstaying its welcome with me. And since I am very clearly not the target audience for this, I think that means most, if not all of the target audience will probably enjoy the entire thing and never really feel like it's running out of steam. Moving on to the mix, and I have 2 things. One of which is that I don't quite know who this movie is for. Like, there is a very vocal film Twitter crowd that has been all about this movie since it was announced and started advertising itself well over a year ago. And to this day, that has never made sense for me. Like, some people that I really know and I have somewhat of a relationship or friendship with that I've seen get gaga'd over this, I'm like, really? You, the Barbie movie? Make that make sense. But it's odd to me that I took all 3 of my kids, got very different receptions from all of them, and the 2 that this movie should be geared towards in my mind were not exactly the ones walking away the happiest with it. It just seems odd to me. I feel like there was a way to do this movie to achieve the goals that they wanted to and to say and convey the things that Greta Gerwig wanted to with it, while still maintaining that appeal to younger ages. We see a lot of movies, and I'm sure it's very difficult, that do achieve that very well, to where there is a storyline, there's sight gags, there's things going on that can track with younger audiences and make them laugh and have fun with what they're doing, but there's also some dialogue, some context, some commentary, or some narrative explorations that are going to be above their head that the adults can latch onto. And this is not that type of movie. This is something that's geared towards like mid-20s, early 30s type demographic. And that's just a little weird. You know, like, if I didn't know what this movie was about, if I was not so involved with movie news and film Twitter and the productions of movies, and I just saw the Barbie poster, which I assume most people are just going to be walking in, seeing a trailer, seeing a poster for Barbie, bringing all their little girls, I would assume this is a movie for them. But it's not. It's not at all. And so on one hand, it's kind of interesting that this movie is not for young kids and it's geared more towards adults and 20-somethings and things like that. That's very subversive and that's very unique. But at the same time, it's just odd to me. I don't know how else to convey it. It's just weird. The other mixed aspect, despite the fact that I do commend this movie and already have commended it for how sharp and how smart the writing is and how creative it is, I do feel like maybe there's a bit too much being explored here. It's a bit of like satirical overload. You know, it's one of those things where there's so many different subjects, there's so many different things about society and gender roles and men and women and the differences and hierarchies and pay gaps and all the multitude of subjects that this movie is tackling from many different angles, that the movie is constantly in that tone. Like, almost every single line of dialogue in this movie is satirical or is winking at the audience in some way, or there's like a double entendre with every line. And while that's really impressive and commendable that they could keep that up for 2 hours, I do also think that maybe it was a bit too much. And that kind of goes along with just balancing out the demographics of who this movie is for. If there was a little bit less of that and a little bit more appeal for children, I think that probably would have taken away this and just molded both of my mix into one. But there was a point in the film where it was just like, okay, this is almost getting to be a bit of a headache, because everything that is said, you take it at face value, and in the back of your head, you're thinking, okay, how does that relate to my world? And it's just kind of hard to keep up with 2 hours of that pacing at one constant tone. Moving on to the negatives, I don't really feel like any one idea that this movie is poking fun at and exploring and satirizing comes to a satisfying conclusion. And maybe it's because there's too much there, but every little idea that they bring up and they compare how the real world relates to the Barbie world, they all felt half-cooked to me. To where the pacing of how they go from one thing to the next is so breakneck that any one thing that you're really passionate about, we're like, oh yes, tell me about this, let's unpack that. By the time they start talking about it, they have finished talking about it and they've moved on to something else. And for a movie that makes the active choice to be a film that creates discussion, I just don't feel like there was enough discussion. There was just a lot of stating things very quickly to bring them up and then moving on to something else. And that's not very rewarding for me. I don't think that's going to be rewarding for anybody that doesn't already have the exact same mindset as the people that wrote the film and the people that made the film. There's going to be a lot of cheering, a lot of laughs, a lot of girlfriends patting themselves in the back when they go and check this out because there's things that are brought up. They're like, yes, yes. There was one in my theater where there was like a monologue of one character just stating things about what it's like to be a woman, and then it was quiet for 2 seconds and this woman in front of me went, period. And that's the crowd that's really going to get a lot out of this. When I feel like it would be more valuable to utilize this movie to create discussion, to maybe challenge a few people that don't already agree with that stuff, or create discussion that would give them some new perspective on how they see things, which is the inherent puzzle of this movie, which is just Barbie world and holding up the mirror to the real world to show how ridiculous things are because they are opposites. That right there is the vehicle for that discussion, but there's just not much discussing. Just stating.
I won't let you do just one appendectomy.
But I'm a man.
But not a doctor.
Can I talk to a doctor?
You are talking to a doctor.
I need a clicky pen?
No.
A sharp thing?
No.
There he is. Doctor!
Somebody get security.
Another big missed opportunity for me in the movie was I felt like the way that they concluded all of these discussions in the third act, the note that the movie decides to leave all these characters on, there was an opportunity there to have more of a discussion of like equality and everybody being on the same plane. And they chose to go more the humorous route of, we got to get Barbie back on top. And we got to make sure that Ken knows his place in Barbie land. And that's the balance. That's the joke of the movie, is that Barbie land is one way, the real world is another way. But by the end of it, I would think you would want to have the discussion of the correct way and a perfect utopian society is that everybody's on an equal plane. That's what equality is all about, right? It's not one's more important or better than the other. And so when you get to the end of the film and it just continues on with some of the taking Ken down a peg jokes and, you know, can we just have one seat on the Supreme Court? No, but we'll give you a generic position to make you feel important. Like things like that are funny. And I'm very secure in my masculinity. I can laugh at stuff like that. I can laugh at an entire movie that is taking the men down a peg and vice versa. But I just don't feel like this movie utilized the opportunity that it could have with so many of the different discussions that it brings off to leave on that note that would have been more satisfying and a little bit healthier for me, instead of just going the jokey route of, okay, now balance has been restored. Well, is that really balance? Is that really the message we're walking away with? Now, don't get me wrong, there are already plenty of channels and thumbnails, and there will continue to be plenty of people out there that are going to use this as a soapbox, like, this is just Hollywood yet again hating men. No, if you watched this and that was the message you walked away with, that's absolutely ridiculous. You weren't listening. But I do feel like the only step in that direction that is reasonable is just saying that they could have ended it on a more even keel to just have a healthier discussion by the end of it, and they chose not to. They chose to have a little bit of that imbalance for a joke. Beyond those two things, just very clearly, this is not a movie for me. It's not made for me, and it's not a movie that I would ever go back to, and so inherently my experience, my score, my reception of this film is going to be lower because of that. It's just not my thing. Like, I enjoyed it decent enough, had a decent enough time with it. I picked up what they were putting down, appreciated a lot of the filmmaking about it, but if I wasn't somebody that doesn't discuss and critique movies for a living, I probably would have never seen this, and I don't see myself ever rewatching it for that reason. So all in all, guys, if you have been going nuts about this movie, if you've loved the marketing, if you totally are vibing with what this movie is going for, you're probably going to love it, but it's a very specific audience, and you know if you are not in that audience. And beyond that audience, it's an absolute toss-up if you're going to enjoy this or it's just not going to be for you. That's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my 2023 new release reviews. And I'm also going to put my review of Cobweb, the release this weekend that's absolutely going to be overshadowed. If you're a horror fan, check that out, the movie and the review. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. Oppenheimer review coming tomorrow. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.